Okay, if we can just go to the next slide. All right, everyone. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. I'm very honored and I'm very thankful for the connection that was made. So my name is Crystal Jade, and I'm a teacher myself. I teach mathematics to primary and middle school and high school, but I'm also a teacher trainer. In this session together, I hope to be a facilitator where you'd get to hear some ideas from me in regards to innovative learning methods and specifically blended learning, which I am extremely passionate about. So if you could just very quickly go to the next slide. Just a few words. I'm also the founder of Vitacom Education. What we do is we empower communities through lifelong learning, and we do this primarily through training teachers and adults. All right, next slide. So today's goals. We're going to talk about a teaching and learning method that can help us with autonomous or otherwise learner-owned learning, virtual learning, and distance learning. That method will specifically be blended learning. And if I say so, high quality blended learning. When we get into an introduction for that, we're also going to look into the blended learning models, which include flipped classroom, which is one of the first that you can use when implementing blended. And even further, we're going to look at how these models can aid all of the above things that we said, which are virtual learning, distance learning, and autonomous learning. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is a slide by Sue Beckingham. She is one of the highly esteemed educators out there and researchers as well. So this provides you with a brief overview of some of the definitions of modes of learning in higher education. So as you can see on your screen, in person, as we all know, students learn in the classroom, lab, lecture theater, workshop, studio, or other place-based learning space on campus. I'm going to go quickly to distance. I'm going to go directly into that. Students' learning is physically removed from a campus. Usually this is online, but can also include physical resources, and learning can be synchronous or asynchronous, meaning it will happen at the same time, live, or it won't be live and someone can go back and watch it whenever they need to. Now, if you think back, before the internet was so widely used, distance learning also existed back then, and included things like emailing and even letters, hard copy materials. But we've moved on to a new era. So that model had to also adjust to the needs of today. Self-directed is also a mode of higher learning, but we're going to look into that a bit more. And we've got all these things, which I'm not going to mention now because I don't want to waste too much time. You have that slide. We will provide that for you. You can take more time into reading that because we want to focus on specific things today. So if you could please go to the next slide. All right. So we mentioned blended learning. What does it do? I'm going to promise a bunch of things today, but all are very realistic outcomes, even though they might look like they set the bar quite high. So what blended learning can do, specifically high quality blended learning, it extends the learning environment, and it extends it because, as we all know, it doesn't necessarily mean we have to be in between four walls anymore. We can also go outside, we can also be online, but it also extends it in the sense that, for example, I can see Maxime on my screen, if I can use you as a facilitator for this. So Maxime, if you are very specialized in something, or if you're very passionate about something, and I'm not, I don't share the same knowledge as you do. If I know that I'm not 100% there, what I will do is, if you have a lecture online, or if I know you or connect with you, what I can do is I can indirectly bring you into my classroom. And the reason for that is we have to give our students the best that we can. And we have to, when saying that, understand that we are not always the alpha and omega. We have to be humble in that process to know that we need the help of other educators and other people out there. So Maxime, I would love to have had you in my classroom to share your talents with my students. I'm sure you've got a ton. All right. It offers convenience for teachers and learners because a lot of things can be online, meaning if we've got paperwork, I don't have to keep carrying that paperwork with me all the time. I can just upload it to Google Drive. That's one example. It allows us to use resources from across the world. Like we said, Maxime, I don't know where you're from, but I'm sure you're not in Cyprus. And also maximize the time teachers have with learners. We're going to look into that a little bit more, specifically with flipped classroom. One of the most important things, one of the nicest things that it can make, is make textbooks come to life. So I don't know if any of you have used applications where you have a barcode of an animal, and when you just scan it, it brings that animal into a 3D formation. So you can make books a little bit more interactive. But to get to the point of it, what Blended can do, or a lot of methods can also do, is they can help us get to our goals faster while reaching more students effectively with long-lasting benefits. Because obviously, I'm assuming that you also don't want your learners to come into a classroom. You say what you have to say, it helps them for a little bit, they retain that information, and then after a week or two, they forget it. Then what was the point for that? So we need to see what is out there, what methods can we use, how we can maximize them in order to give them the best that we can so that the benefits of the learning can last as long as possible. So next slide, please. Name dropping a bunch of benefits that this method has. Very quickly, I'm not going to read all of them. You can see them also on your screen. Independence, it's personalized. Therefore, it serves different learner needs because we don't all have the same learner needs, or we don't all have the same types of learning. There's space and comfort. It can be mobile, self-paced. Storage we mentioned earlier with things like Google Drive. It's cost effective. Why is it cost effective? If, for example, Rajiv, am I saying your name correctly? Raj? Yeah, okay. So if you, when you were younger, you needed extra tutorials on math, like I did, for example, at some point, and your parents couldn't drive you, right? Or if it was too far, it would have been too cost effective, either because they'd have to leave work at some point and therefore maybe lose on the hours of pay, or because they'd have to use petrol. But online, we kind of can make use of the online environment to also be cost effective. It allows for revision. We're going to come back to that. And it has a wider range of resources like human resources as well. And it sets higher learning standards. A lot of things that I'm promising to you. So let's see if we'll actually be able to utilize all of those benefits. Next slide, please. So blended learning. You have a quick visual, not just from this photo, but from things that you've heard about it. Next slide, please. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go into Mentimeter. And what I'd like for you to do, using the code that will come up, is I want you to use a word to describe what you think blended learning is. And there is no wrong answer. So please go ahead and have fun with it as well. One of the favorite words, creative, absolutely. Adaptive, yes. Spot on. Accessible. And when we say accessible, also that means inclusive. So thank you for that. Different method, a new way to learn, absolutely. Flexibility, yep. Smart, absolutely. I think there's a saying that says Don't work harder, but work smarter. And I think this is one of the ways to do that. Online, yes. New. Distance. And the voting is closed. All right, you are all spot on. It combined all of those things. So I want you to keep in mind all of these answers because they will come into play. But I also want you to specifically remember creative, adaptive, flexible. Okay, so those 3 words, and smart. All of them are important though. So if we can just go back to the slides. Thank you all for participating, by the way. All right, so having said that, let's go into an introduction. Okay, so when we talk about blended, as I'm sure, again, you have some sort of visualization of what it could be. One of the photos that we can come up to when we research it is this. So the combination of online, e-learning, face-to-face, together, they make blended. Next slide, please. The other one is something like this. The traditional classroom methods with online digital media together. Next slide, please. And having said that, when you go online and look up a definition, you will very likely, if you do a Google search, come up with something like this: a style of education in which students learn via electronic and online media as well as traditional face-to-face teaching. Next slide, please. Now, that definition is not incorrect by any means. However, for people who haven't had the luxury to spend more time into it and look at how complex and versatile it is, it has the potential in the hecticness, if I can say that, if the confusion, the stress of everyday life with all that they ask us to do as teachers, it also can shift our focus to things that have to do just with the online environment or just with technology. Because the definition itself, if you can just very briefly go back, please. So if we look at some of the words, they say electronic is there, online media, right? And when we say online and electronic, it automatically shifts our focus sometimes to the tools and the online environment. Next slide, please. And if we do that, it takes away from the purpose of blended learning. Blended learning is not about its tools. Yes, it does incorporate technology, absolutely, and it does incorporate an online learning environment, and specifically not just the online, but an LMS system, a learning management system like Google Classroom. And it does all that. But when we say technology, sometimes we think technology integration, but technology integration and using technology in your classroom for the sake of a higher purpose is not necessarily the same. So we're going to look into this a little bit more. Can we go into the next slide, please? Okay. What high quality blended learning does, it's very learner-centered. And when I say learner-centered, it means our focus is the learner. Our focus does never shift to the tools. It's not about the online environment. Yes, we use it, but we use it in a way that is going to benefit the learners that we have in front of us, the dynamic of the group that we have in front of us at that time, which is not the same every time. So it also values the learner participation and engagement. And I say this because if you're teaching in a face-to-face classroom and you take whatever it is that you're teaching and you place it on an online environment, it's not going to change the participation or the engagement just because you put it online, just because, for example, you're watching me online instead of face-to-face. Some of the times, actually taking away that face-to-face element can make a classroom less engaging if we don't use the online environments when having our focus on the students, on the learner, not the tools, but how to use those tools in order to engage the learner, in order to make him learn as much as possible. So, blended learning acknowledges the existence of varied mastery levels among learners and the need for effective differentiation. What do we mean by varied mastery levels? In your classroom, are all your learners the same? Nod, yes, no, up and down, right? So in any given day, you might have students in your classroom that some of them might, let's talk about my favorite topic, math. So in your classroom, if we are going to divide a classroom into 3 groups, so the beginners, the intermediate, and the advanced, right? If you go into a classroom, and I'm just standing in a classroom straight up, and I open up a book and I read from it, or I present with a presentation like this, the problem with something like that, with just that lecturer technique, is that I'm teaching to the middle, meaning if I move at the same pace, at the same time, for every student, not everyone's going to get it. And if I can continue with that way, it means that the beginner group will drop and the advanced will be disengaged. So what Blended wants to do is want to find a way to diversify how we use technology in order to make sure that every mastery level is engaged and also gets the effective differentiation that they need in order to tackle the learning difficulties that they might be facing. So having said that, blended learning is mindful of its methodological components, elements, and tools, and is focused on leveraging them strategically and intentionally to assist with the 3 aforementioned points. Next slide, please. So it's about strategically and intentionally, please keep this word in mind, intentionally, utilizing its tools, technology, and online learning management system, the LMS, such as Google Classroom, to allow for repurposed time, learner engagement, teaching effectiveness, and giving the learners the best possible learning experience. Next slide, please. So let's tackle blended learning versus technology integration. If we go to the next slide, there's a Mentimeter activity for you. So if you can just go ahead and do that. And also, if we could not keep the answers for later, I will show them on the screen, if that's okay with you. Let me remind you, the question is this blended learning? An example blended. It's okay, Raj, don't worry. I see some smiling faces. I'd like to say, do not worry, we're going to go through all of this together. Next question, please. I see some people are a bit more hesitant to respond to this one. I can see there's a division of words. All right, and last question. Quite an overwhelming vote for this one. All right, and if you could let me share my screen, that would be fantastic.
Hi.
We have someone's mic in the background. If we can just put it a little bit lower, because I'm hearing an echo. Okay, so let's get to those questions. Students use laptops in class to take notes. I think the majority of you said yes, it's blended learning. A teacher uses an interactive whiteboard and projector during a lesson. Don't remember which one that was, but I'm going to just say random question. And most of you for this one said yes. So I'm just going to submit, because this is through a Google Classroom, through a Google form that's attached to an LMS, which is Google Classroom. All right, let's have a look. So students use laptops in class to take notes. Is it blended learning? No, it's not blended learning. It's just use of technology at school, or a better way to say it, it's technology integration. A teacher uses an interactive whiteboard and a projector during a lesson. Is it blended? No. Using a whiteboard in classroom, just like that, in that context, is just technology integration. However, if for homework the teacher sends students videos on how to prove Pythagoras' theorem, which they watch at home, and then they come back to class and discuss it and are asked to prove it, then that is blended learning. Specifically, it's flipped classroom. Okay, let's talk about why that is. First of all, when we use technology, and specifically an online platform that we use for education, whatever we do has to directly inform what we're doing in the classroom. Very different. So you see in the third case, we use technology, we took videos, we sent them via an LMS, a learning management system, and then they came back and whatever happened online informed what was happening in the classroom directly. Now, this example right here, what you use, but also specifically this Google form, is a form of blended learning. What we're doing, if, of course, we had the context of being face-to-face as well, this would have been blended learning because it's connected to an LMS, like we said, the Google Classroom, but it also is feeding the discussion that we're having, the topic that we're discussing. And not only that, but it gives you feedback immediately so that you can learn more effectively. So I'm going to stop sharing. Can we go back to the slides? Okay, so blended learning, here are some musts. So whatever happens in the LMS, the learning management system that is online, needs to directly inform what's happening in the classroom. Otherwise, if you're just using technology, it's considered technology integration. They're similar, but not the same. Both great, but not the same. But in my opinion, blended is better. So next slide. Okay, why is blended better? Because it recognizes the problem with one-size-fits-all formulas. Like we said earlier, we don't all learn the same. We don't all learn at the same pace. What blended does, it does not teach to the middle. It finds ways to diversify learning, to repurpose time. And when we talk about repurpose time, it means that, let's say, Mr. Doran and Maxim are in my group, and we have a small group where we discuss a few things. Raj with Gabriella are in another group doing a hands-on activity, because I can see that they're going to learn in a better way with that, right? And blended, it's simply, like we said, because it's learner focused, it's simply about great teaching. And like we said, things won't change just if we put them online. They're not going to become automatically better or more interactive. So blended is about quality time via repurposed time. Next slide, please. Okay, one of the most important things that blended does, it allows for space to make a few shifts in roles. So in most classrooms, I don't know if these are classrooms that you're also familiar with, if this is your experience, but mostly what happens, what we see and what students describe is that they have the teacher at the front of the class presenting the lecture, the seminar, the lesson of the day, and they're mainly standing in front, maybe with a PowerPoint, maybe sometimes distributing questionnaires, exercises, but mainly just teaching at the same time in front of everybody. What blended does, it shifts that persona from the lecture persona to the facilitator guide persona. And when we say this, it means that the educator is no longer at the front. It's not the typical traditional movement in the classroom. That teacher has a pad and they're working around the classroom. They're looking at the different groups that they've created in the classroom via repurposed time. So some are working on a hands-on activity. Some are doing a classroom exercise. Some are having quality time with an assistant. And they're moving around with that pad, listening to what's happening, listening to what their needs are, taking those down so that they provide another shift, which is called, we're moving from fixed groupings to dynamic groupings. What are fixed groupings? Fixed groupings means that in your classroom, you've labeled your students and you've categorized them and put them into 3 groups. Let's say the blues, yellows, and reds. The problem with the blues, yellows, and reds, which represent beginner, intermediate, and advanced, is that just because Maria, for example, today in this classroom, in this topic that we're teaching, she's not very confident, it doesn't mean that tomorrow she's not going to be much better, because it might have been a topic that she has been exposed to earlier or that she's passionate about. So for you to keep her in the same group where the mastery level was lower than what she has, it means that she won't have the opportunity to move further ahead and acquire a higher level of mastery. So the dynamic groupings mean because you're walking around, you can see what the similar problems are between students, you take notes, and then you move them according to their needs. So if one of the repurposed time tasks is for them to come to you, you know specifically, I need to explain to these students how to do long division. And they have a specific problem with this algorithm, let's say. And meanwhile, the others can do something that they need to do. Having said that, while this is happening, the educator is no longer the explainer, so we don't give them everything, but we intervene when it's necessary. While that's happening, we want them to learn through discovery as much as possible. And if we see that there's something that's going really wrong, that's when we intervene. The other shift that happens is that we're not just presenting them with knowledge. We're not just helping them store that at the back of their minds. We want to put time to also develop skills and mindsets and also focus on the implementation of knowledge. Because I don't know if that's something you also see, but for example, in the context of Cyprus, we have many students with degrees, but the problem is that when they go into the work market, they don't know how to implement that knowledge. And I'm sure that you can understand what problems that might bring. The other shift that happens is that the student is not necessarily a passive recipient, but is an active participator in the learning experience. And it does not become an obligation, but we foster that for learning. All these three, by the way, the last three, are things that could have happened without technology. And it's something important noting that we don't say, okay, we've got all these new methods, which are great. And like I said, I'm passionate about blended. But again, blended is never about technology or online. It's about that interaction, that quality interaction that you have with your students, and how do you use these components to add an extra layer, an extra dimension where everyone can learn and want to learn and love to learn. Next slide, please. We said the repurposed time things already. If we can go to the next, please. Next slide. All right, so why do we want to do all this? Especially when we talked about the shift from just knowledge to knowledge, mindsets, skills, values, implementation, is because we all know that there are so many problems that we're all facing, that now is the time for us to give our students the skills that they need, everything that they need, so they don't only survive with everything that's going on there, but they thrive, and they also become active citizens that take on global issues and challenges such as these presented by the UN SDGs. Next slide, please. So, high quality blended learning includes academic rigor, so we have high standards and high expectations. It's goal-driven, mastery-based. I'm going to stop there for a quick second, please. Okay, when we talk about mastery-based, in our traditional classrooms, what usually happens is we move the variable that makes us move on with our content that we're teaching is time. That's the variable. With blended, although this is something that's going to take some time, usually about 3 to 5 years of implementing blended in a school, depending on the infrastructure, is that the movement happens when mastery is acquired. So let's say I have my students and I want them to add, subtract, multiply, divide fractions. If they haven't already mastered multiplication, so the timetables, how are they supposed to be able to do well in the higher level that needs that previous knowledge? Which is something that we do unfortunately, because of how the system is created. We do move with the passage of time, meaning that we leave students behind. And especially with every lesson, but I can see it with math also. If you don't tackle the foundation, if the foundation of learning isn't there for students, as time goes on, that gap is bigger and bigger, and the difficulties are bigger, and then they lose out on the opportunity to learn. High quality blended learning is also personalized and learner-owned. Next slide. And includes all of these lovely things, which I'm not going to spend time on because we don't have a lot of time, but we will give you this slide as well. Next slide. Next slide. Okay, so how on earth do we do all of these lovely things that I'm promising? Next slide. Okay, so we do it via the blended learning models. There are 4 main ones, with the first one breaking up into 4 sub-models. So we've got the rotation model, we've got the flex model, the a la carte model, and the enriched virtual. The ones that we're going to focus on a bit more are station rotation. Well, in general, the rotation models. And within that, flipped classroom and station rotation. Now, the rotation model is something that actually was widely used and is still used by kindergarten teachers, and also in primary schools, depending on the context of every country, which is essentially we break up our students into different groups. And maybe perhaps if you can envision your classroom, you've got 4 desks here, 4 desks there, and they move around, right? So that's something that you probably have seen. Next slide, please. All right, so let's start with station rotation. The station rotation model allows students to rotate through stations on a fixed schedule, which you have created because you have diagnosed the needs and you have set that schedule in the context of your curriculum, where at least one of the stations is an online learning station that is attached to a learning management system. This model is most common, like we said, in elementary schools because teachers are already familiar with rotating centers or stations. Next slide, please. So it could look something like this. We've got one group with online instruction, the other one is teacher-led instruction, and the other one is collaborative activities or stations. Usually blended in schools that have a lot of budget and can have teacher assistants, they also have a floating teacher to facilitate the process even more. In my context, that hasn't really happened, but some schools do have that. Next slide. We're going to watch an animation of it. So if you can see, the students are the red ones, and you can see how they're moving around. So fixed schedule and a specific rotation, and the other dots were the teachers. Next slide, please. Next slide. Oh, yeah, I can watch it again, no problem. All right, lab rotation. Lab rotation, unlike station rotation, allows students to rotate through stations on a fixed schedule. However, in this case, online learning occurs in a dedicated computer lab. This model allows for flexible scheduling arrangements with teachers and other paraprofessionals and enables schools to make use of existing computer labs. Next slide, if we can have a look at the photo. So it could look something like this. If me and Maxime, thank you for being my facilitator once again, if we're both teaching at the same time and you're teaching reading and math. Oh, yeah, okay, you're teaching reading and math, and I'm teaching literacy and social studies at the same time, and we both need the computer lab. What we can do is we know that these XYZ students need to go to the computer lab to facilitate their learning, their foundation specifically. You can send them to the lab, which there is an assistant supervising, making sure that all the schedules are being kept. By the way, the LMS, while this is happening, feeds the teacher back into the classroom. If we have a tablet or if we're on a laptop, we can see what they're actually doing. So we're not just sending them off to play on the internet. But there's also an adult there supervising for health and safety reasons. Next slide. We're going to look at the animation. So essentially, they just switch from classroom to the lab. Okay, next slide, please. All right, individual rotation. Individual rotation, that model allows students to rotate through stations, but on individual schedules set by teacher or a software algorithm. Most schools just do it via their teachers because they don't have that much infrastructure when it comes to technology, or they don't have the funds to find a program that is going to use a software algorithms. So unlike the other rotation models, students do not necessarily rotate to every station. They rotate only to the activities scheduled on their playlist. So this is another example that it's tailored, it's learner specific. Next slide. So it could look something like this. We've got a group of intervention. We've got direct instruction. This model is usually used in schools that have a lot of money. They have invested a lot of money on a central learning lab. If we have time to get together again, maybe if we can connect together, I'll share my email. Maybe you can share yours. I'll show you some visual examples of what a school that uses individual rotation looks like. So next slide. So as you see, they move based on the specific playlist and needs. You don't have to go to every station. Next slide, please. Having said that, first of all, I'm going to skip on flipped classroom because I want us to spend a bit more time at the end. But please, previous. Okay, thank you. So what I want to say is this can probably be very overwhelming for you. It's a lot of information at the same time. So this is just an introduction, just to get some information to start percolating. So don't worry, I will make myself available afterwards to see how on earth can we do all of this and what fits for us specifically. So flex is not a rotation model. It's its own category. Sorry. So the flex model lets students move on a fluid schedule among learning activities according to their needs. Online learning is the backbone of student learning in a flex model, and teachers provide support and instruction on a flexible, as-needed basis while students work, while students work through course curriculum and content. This model can give students a high degree of control over their learning. Next slide. What we see in schools that use flex is that the way they treat their environment is very flexible. What I mean is there's a bit of a controlled chaos. And what that means is if we don't have our traditional classrooms anymore, you have them, there might be 1/4 of your students in the classroom, the other ones might be in the lobby, the other ones might be outside. But for a school to be able to do that, it means that they need to have a lot of people supervising all over, and you can't jump into this model so quickly. It needs a lot of infrastructure. So we're not going to focus on that too much. Next slide, please. So you can see there's a lot of moving around. Next slide. A la carte. When I say the word a la carte, if you can feel free now, if you want to just unmute yourself. When I say a la carte, what comes to mind? Very quickly. Maybe something that has to do with a restaurant. Previous slide. Okay. A la carte. Any ideas as to what that could mean?
Fine dining.
Oh, yes, fine dining. And when you go for fine dining, what happens? Do you choose whatever you want, or do they give you a fixed schedule?
It's kind of a fixed
Is
thing, isn't it? Is it?
Is it? Let's see. Let's have a look. Thanks so much for the input. So the a la carte model, very much like fine dining, enables students to take an online course with an online teacher of record in addition to other face-to-face courses, which often provide students with more flexibility in their schedules. A la carte courses can be a greater option when schools can't provide particular learning opportunities, such as advanced placement or elective courses, making it one of the more popular models in blended high schools. Any examples as to when a school is going to need to bring in an external contractor or educator online? Sabina, I'm going to go to you. I see you said food, so I'm going to take a risk on you and say, any ideas? Who would want to bring something specialized that they don't already have at school?
Well, in Italy, for example, we have something called l'alternanza scuola-lavoro, which should be some education which brings the students towards work environment. And well, most traditional teachers haven't got the skills for that. So you would bring in a coacher, or you would bring somebody from industry into that.
Yeah, that would be a perfect example. Thanks so much for sharing that.
That's
Another
okay.
example is if the school at the moment, for whatever reason, perhaps the pandemic, they don't have a special needs teacher, and perhaps even further, a special needs teacher that focuses on mathematics or on a topic that might be especially difficult, they need to bring someone online. Or, for example, Christina's example was actually spot on. For example, at my school, I wanted to become a teacher, but we didn't have that elective. So I had to consider whether or not I wanted to leave that school. That's not always ideal for families to do that. So something like this can give you the best of both worlds. Next slide, please. So it could look something like this. Next slide. Yep. So the student is removed from the classroom, perhaps from PE, although I don't advise you remove students from PE because it's a very important lesson. Next slide. Enrich Virtual is an alternative full-time online school that allows students to complete the majority of coursework online at home or outside of the school, but attend school for required face-to-face learning sessions with a teacher. Unlike the flipped classroom, Enrich Virtual programs usually don't require daily school attendance, and some programs may only require twice weekly attendance, for example. I'm going to tell you some examples of why something like this would be necessary. Before the pandemic, it would have been even harder to imagine, but I understand that because we've all gone through this together, we can see in the pandemic environment that some students might not be able to go into school every day. Even some systems break classrooms into groups of 2 and they alternate. Another example is there are a lot of teenagers who become pregnant at a young age and therefore are not able to join school every day because they have to work. They are young mothers, they have to support their family. So something like this could help. And the last example that I'm going to give for this before we move on is prisoners. Prisoners don't have the opportunity to go to school necessarily. So something like this could help aid the two, obviously, while putting some protocols of safety in place. Next slide. Could look like this. Next slide. Thank you. Next slide. And flipped classroom. This is where you can start your flipped, your blended learning journey, rather, unless you already have. Okay, so flipped classroom, what it does, it literally just flips things upside down. So as we know, traditional classrooms, in the classroom during the day, we would have our lecture, we would have our presentation, so we present the theory and do that, and then at home we would send them home to do homework, and then they would come to school, back to school. What a flip does, it reverses it too, meaning that we record, Josefina records, for example, her lecture, she puts it on the online learning management system, and then the students, now this is their homework, that used to be classwork, the theory. At home, they watch the lecture, and that's great because they can watch it as many times as they need. They can pause it and go back as many times as they need, meaning that they come back to classroom with a much better idea because they did it at their own pace. They watched the theory, they did as many times as they needed, they're more prepared, they're more confident now. They come to classroom, and in the classroom, you focus on the implementation of the knowledge that Josefina shared with her students. I hope I'm saying your name correctly, by the way. So, why was the traditional setting a bit problematic? As a teacher myself, a lot of the times I struggle to give my students homework, and not because I'm the cool teacher, but because with math, for example, if I'm not absolutely certain that all my students understand in depth the conceptual part of it, but also the process of it, the step-by-step, and they go back home and they do the process entirely wrong, and because I'm not going to give them one exercise, I'm going to give them 3, 4, 10, depending, and they keep practicing that wrong methodology, it's going to get stuck in their mind, meaning that they're going to teach themselves something that's entirely wrong, and then they're going to come back to classroom, and then I'll have to move on with the rest of the class, and I won't have time to address it. So what this does is it gives them an idea, they've got time to do it at their own pace, they come into classroom, and we work on the implementation where, because I'm no longer stuck at the front of the classroom, I can move around, I can watch what they're doing, I can take notes, I can bring the students that have the same needs into a group, so I can directly give them what they need. Next slide. Next slide, please. Now, to do flipped, obviously you're going to use some recording material. You're going to need some tools like your camera. You can use your laptop's camera, a basic mic, really. Then there are open source softwares that you can use, which we can talk about at another time. Next slide. Okay, what I'd like to do now, if I can share a video with you, I'd like to give you an example of what it could look like, because even though I've shared with you the animations of it, it's not really enough of a visual. So let me find this for you. And I'm going to go into YouTube, and I'm going to mute myself so you don't hear me twice.
Hi, Angel. How are you? Good. Nice job, Mr. 6.10.
So one of the toughest challenges students face when they walk into classrooms is they feel tense. They're worried about being put on the spot, especially if they're behind or don't understand a skill. When they come into our classrooms, they know they're picking up where they left off. We're seeing students' anxiety levels drop and their commitment and desire to master content increase.
So I want to shout out Nathaniel and Will. They came on their own time. They got some videos going and they are ahead of pace.
Eastern High School is located in the Capitol Hill neighborhood of Washington, D.C. Being 100% free and reduced lunch, our students come to us with varied levels of academic performance.
When I came to Eastern, I was sort of shocked with how broad the variety of learning levels was. We have students who have experienced a ton of trauma, who are behind on certain skill sets, are ahead in certain skill sets, have different subsets of experience when they go home. I quickly found out that my traditional model of teaching was not actually effective. So at that time, I realized I needed to make a shift, and I wanted to start by getting rid of the lecture at the beginning of my class. I'm gonna get started today with revision. So Santana and Jamie, just see me in the back real quick. The instructional model that I started implementing, there are 3 components: blended learning, self-paced structure, and mastery-based grading. What you would see today is really a controlled chaos environment. You have some students starting a new lesson, watching an instructional video, taking their guided notes. You have other kids working on actual lesson assignments, collaborating on whiteboards, really problem solving. And then you'll see other students working on exit tickets to achieve mastery.
I like Mr. Furr's class because it teaches you independence. For every lesson, we start off with a video, and then during the video, we have to take notes. Mr. Furr, he does the videos himself. You'll hear his voice every time you watch a video.
In today's lesson, we're going to focus on finding our local maxes and mins.
I love it, actually. You get to pause it, stop, and then go back and be able to rewatch the lesson over again until I fully understand and grasp the strategies and formulas.
Once they're done watching that instructional video, they transition to some type of assignment or activity.
That's it for A, right? Mm-hmm. And then we already found the number over there. And now say find the rate of change of the weight of the oil.
Everyone learns different, so you may be on lesson 5, someone may be on 3. It all depends on how you work. It's better than in a regular class where everybody has to stay on the same thing. The students help each other. So if you ahead, you might can help someone that's behind.
Oh, okay, so after you get 9 over 4, you gotta divide the whole thing by 4. Okay. All right.
After that, there's an exit ticket.
So an exit ticket is like a mini quiz. It's just a couple questions at the end of the lesson that really succinctly measure the student's ability to execute the activities they learned. So when a student has mastered an exit ticket, they move forward. When they don't, they have a reteach. You're assuming that your Y is 0. And then they try a new exit ticket until they've achieved mastery.
Showtime. Did you get your exit ticket right? Well, your derivative is spot on.
So because I am not delivering a lecture, I'm now free to work with students for the entirety of the class period.
X equals 4.
Yes. Woo.
Real quick, just remind me, what do you have to argue? Who is more responsible for perpetuating the Cold War? I'm going to meet with a few people on topic sentences first.
The video instruction makes me feel like I've been able to clone myself. Instead of needing to explain a concept and then re-explain the concept and then say it again, I'm giving the instruction on the video, which frees me up to work one-on-one or in small groups.
Does your topic sentence directly answer the essay question? No, it doesn't.
I like it a lot. I never feel like I'm being rushed or feel like, oh, I already know this. Like, why am I going over this again? I always feel like I'm being challenged.
I have a really accurate pulse check of where my students are. So-and-so is on 6.9 and they're about halfway through because I haven't seen an exit ticket yet, whereas another student has advanced to 6.10 and I can even lean on that student to explain something to their peers.
Okay, so you're only going to use 2 quote explication charts, your 2 strongest ones.
I think it helps with your time management. A couple days ago, I had to stay after school to get my work done because I was slacking a little bit. When you miss a class, you can watch the video at home to catch up.
Part of the reason this format works so well is we have a lower than average in-seat attendance rate. In a traditional format, once the teacher delivers that lesson, they're moving on to the next lesson the next day, and they don't get an opportunity to go back over it.
I've had students who, sadly, in a traditional classroom, they simply would have failed the quarter due to their number of absences for legitimate reasons and often sometimes really heartbreaking reasons. With this way of teaching, that student can come really with more of a fighting chance and ultimately pass a quarter.
In our model, if a student is experiencing distress and needs emotional support, it doesn't disrupt the larger classroom environment. I'm able to pivot and work with that student, discuss what's going on, while the other students are able to access the content and flourish.
You have to do 10, then put parentheses in the calculator too.
I did.
Oh, you got it. It's supposed to be a positive, girl.
Sorry, Crystal, we can't.
Your microphone is off.
Okay, can you hear me now? Fantastic. If you can go back to the slides very quickly, and we're going to try and wrap up based on the time that our hosts tell us that we should take. All right, so what we saw in that video is one of the forms that blended learning can take. So like we said, blended is about using whatever you have, the online, the technology, whatever you have, the combination of face-to-face and online through an LMS in order to maximize whatever is around you so that you can give the students quality time with you, quality time with their peers, quality time for them to learn autonomously on their own. And so a more accurate definition for blended learning would be the following, a more inclusive one rather. Blended learning, we can say, is a mix of traditional and digital technologies that are blended together in a way that helps learners learn more productively. They use their time better, they achieve more, it can take many forms, and therefore it's not a one-size-fits-all formula. This definition was from Professor Diana Lorillard from UCL Institute of Education. Next slide. So if I can ask our hosts, I know I can see that we're at the 1 hour and 5 minutes mark. So I don't want to do something that might take much longer. Perhaps we could do it at another time. So perhaps we should move on to the next slide and we can see if we can come back to it. So before we finish, like we said, this was an extremely brief introduction into blended and what it could look like. Most importantly, it was to clarify that in order to make it an autonomous setup, an empowering setup, we need to think about it more in terms of how to use the tools for the benefits of our learners, but they would need to remain the focus of what we're doing. So what I'd like for you to do is, if you could kindly pop in the chat your email if you'd like, and I can contact you. I will also provide it to our host to put on the Facebook page. So if you'd like to learn more about Blended and how to implement it based on your needs, feel free to reach out. Next slide. Before we finish, if you can take a few minutes to scan this code so we can so you can complete this survey. Really appreciate it. And Gabriela, if you can let me know after the surveys are completed, if we have time for the interactive time clock climb, you just give me the nod, yeah? Excellent, thank you.
Yes, I think you can proceed with it. It's no problem.
Okay, let's just finish the survey first.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thanks to you.
Gabriela, we're being asked if we can have the link to the survey. Could you help with that? It's in the comments.
Yes, 1 second is going to be on the chat.
It was great to meet you, Rajiv, and thank you for also facilitating some of the questions as well.
You too. Thank you very much for having me. They're going to close the building. Gotta go.
Go for it, go for it.
Bro.
Krista?
Yes.
More or less everybody has completed the survey. So for the ones who are still completing it, you can go on. But in the meantime, if you want to proceed with the game, I think.
Yep. Okay, great. Could we then go back a few slides? Yeah, here. Okay. So if you could kindly, where it says join.nearpod.com, if you want to copy that into your browser, so just put in join.nearpod.com. And actually, let me just share my screen. It will also be easier for you to see. Can I have screen sharing rights? I'll share the code on the browser. Okay. All right. So let me just zoom in a bit. All right. So if you can again, once more, put in join.nearpod.com and put in this code. You can just click on copy. Actually, that's just me, really. I'll just copy that in the chat for you to make your life a bit easier. Oh, you did it. Thanks so much. What a great facilitating team, actually. Before we start, let me just show you what it's going to look like. It's going to be based on the the things that we talked about. Sorry, I need to copy that into the system here. Okay, so we're going to go back to it now so we can do it together. All right, live participation. So go ahead and just try your best. Oh, sorry, sorry everybody. You're going to have to use this new link, this new number. Unless you've already done it, that's absolutely fine. You just connect that here. Apologies. So as you go in, I'll be able to see you. So if you can just go back to the same link, just put a different code this time. Paste. You have it, I think. It's this one right here. Maxime, you're my favorite. You have a teddy bear as well. Carla, lovely giraffe. Gabriella. Gabriella, if you could unmute yourself and let me know when you'd like for me to click start.
Yeah, I think maybe somebody's still connecting, maybe.
If you can write down in the comments if you're still trying to connect, then we'll wait for you.
Yes,
Otherwise, we
please.
can just show the sample here.
Well, I guess, well, we can start. Let's
Okay, we'll
start with
start.
this one.
All right. Good luck, everyone. See who's going to climb first. So I get to see this. I'm going to stop sharing so you can see your own screen. I'm not sharing, right?
You are not sharing at the moment.
Great. So this entire time as you were playing, I was able to see everyone, the answers that they were giving, which ones you got right, which ones you got correct. Maxime, I knew you were going to do it. Well done. So you can go ahead and close that. I'll also stop sharing. And just to show you once again that whatever we're doing in Blended, when we're using an online environment, is supposed to directly inform what we're doing. So this could have also been connected to an LMS like Google Classroom. So I hope it was a good indication of how we can be engaging. So we did it in 1 hour. I hope you got a good idea. And thank you so much for listening and hosting.
Thank you very much, Krista. Thank you very much for everything. It was really interesting and engaging. We discovered a lot, and this game was really fun. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. If you have any questions, feel free.
If there are not any questions, then we can conclude this workshop. We will see you in the next workshop in April. And thank you everybody for participating. Krista for the presentation and your contribution. And thank you everybody for participating. See you next time.
Bye everyone. Keep safe. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Krista. Bye-bye.